Hello, friends, and welcome. It is so wonderful to see you. Welcome to our Sunday teaching. We're back to Sunday teachings again. We just finished our Skillful Living program. My name, of course, is Venerable Tarpa. Today, we are starting with a deep topic and an important one. We're going to be exploring how to deal with crises. And so the origin of the idea of this came from some of our Sangha members. So people are dealing with a lot these days, and they asked me if I could speak on it. Um, so I think we all know 2005 is proving to be a challenging year as we're coming into it around the world, right? There's crises everywhere, it seems like nowadays. And I wanted to address this from a global kind of viewpoint and keep it out of politics and just look at it more as dealing with all forms of crisis, whatever they may be. Clearly, some countries in the world right now are dealing with more crises than others, but ultimately, we deal with it all in the same way. So we've had so many Sangha members writing, talking about that they're feeling great anxiety. Some are talking about feeling great anger or hopelessness with the new developments they see on the news, and I wanted to address it and see if I could kind of help. To be honest, when people first started coming to me, I wasn't quite sure how to answer because topics like these are very kind of are sometimes tough for Buddhists because Buddhism kind of looks at and addresses issues kind of long term, and but with these developments, people are kind of coming to me in this kind of a hyper crisis mode, right? That that their feelings are visceral, they're immediate, they're intense. And and oftentimes I think that Buddhist advice that I would give um, to them just doesn't seem like enough. It seems it comes across as being more theoretical and not enough to deal with the immediacy of the conflict and feelings that they're experiencing. And I think often they think, well, Dharma advice sounds nice. Ultimately, they see the truth in it, but I think they don't believe it's advice that they can actually apply, that that it's advice that would take too long. So I wanted to bring a little clarity into that. Um, so when we feel that way, we have to be cautious because when we find ourselves in that crisis mode, right? That I call it a hyper crisis mode, more than normal. Um, it can often be just an aspect of samsara itself. So when we talk about samsara being often emotionally driven and reactive, right? It's a reactive state of mind. And that the samsara mind is one that lacks clarity and wisdom. It's an afflicted mind, right? Created through ignorance. Um, Now, when we recognize that, it doesn't mean that we're ignoring the crisis, but what it means is that we're recognizing we might not be in the proper state of mind. So, um, this kind of brings up the teaching of the Buddhas of the two arrows, the teaching of the two arrows by the Buddha. We talked about this a couple weeks ago. When we talk about, oftentimes we suffer twice. Once from the initial injury, say we're insulted, somebody calls us something, that's the first arrow, the initial injury, and it stings, no doubt. But what happens is we don't let it go. We hang on to it, we exaggerate it, we add to it, we compound it, and we make the suffering worse, right? So that one insult that might have been almost nothing, we end up thinking about it all day long, and at the end of the day, we're still laying awake at night, not being able to sleep because of this stupid thing that was said. The Buddha likened that to two arrows. And in this case, it's the same. We can have a crisis that's real, that has to be worked with. But at the same time, we have to be careful of our reaction to it. We have to make sure that we're not exaggerating the crisis, or we're not exaggerating our feelings related to that. So that's the biggest thing we have to look for initially. We want to evaluate our own mental state. So with that said, how is it that we can affect real beneficial change in the world? And the first thing, from a Buddhist standpoint, the first thing to do is to educate ourselves, right? We apply understanding. Right? We try to understand whatever we can about the situation. There's all kinds of crises, right? But what's cool about Buddhism, Buddhism always works at resolving things at the root level. And at the root level, it's amazing on how our problems and our crises all kind of come from the same place, and all can be resolved in often the same ways as well. So we always start with understanding and educating ourselves, understanding why this is happening, where it's happening, what I can do about it. And then secondly, it's important that we develop our minds. So Buddhism seems like a bit of a long-term fix to our problems. But the fact is that the Buddhist path begins before our problems arise. In Buddhism, we develop our minds so that when crises arise, we're mentally and emotionally prepared for them. And thirdly, it's all about balance, right? The Buddha mentioned that one of the problems that humans suffer from is falling into this and that everything we see in the world is either this or that. And binary thinking, we call it, right? Everything's black and white. We don't realize and we don't appreciate the spectrum that things actually exist in. And so the secret here is when conflicts arise, we have to have balance between everything. So, and these are balances between our inner development and our practice and our deep commitment to benefiting others, right? We have to have a balance between the two, a balance between immediate needs and long-term solutions, between insights that arise from our emotions and wisdom from our logic and reason, a balance between the hard truth that's undeniable and our aspirations of the way that things could be, a balance between staying informed with what's happening in the world while not letting it overwhelm us. So the secret is finding balance in all of these things. So when we talk about developing a balance in life, we obviously don't have to cultivate challenges or suffering in our lives. When we say we need a balance between our suffering and our, let's say, negativity and positivity, our suffering and our happiness, trying to find that balance, we don't have to cultivate suffering because, of course, life supplies a bountiful quantity of that, right? Life supplies all the challenges and suffering we need. What we have to do is to make sure we balance that with positivity and productivity, right? And we balance that using our intelligence and our clarity and our higher mental functions, right? So life supplies all these challenges, all the suffering, all these crises, but we have to make sure that we keep up the proper mental state. And these things are what bring us strength and stability in our lives, right? Our intelligence, our clarity. higher mental functions. So when we talk about this kind of balance, this isn't something new in Buddhism. This is something that that the great Vietnamese monk Thich Nhat Hanh coined. He coined the term engaged Buddhism. And so at the time, this is at the height of the Vietnamese War. And if you're in Vietnam, they call it the American War. So the Vietnamese-American War. And Thich Nhat Hanh was a young monk, and the traditional role of monks in this time of war, was to focus on their practice, to ignore all the starvation and all the brutality and suffering going on around them. And the idea, and I think there's truth to the idea that, that the more we can work on our own mental development, the more we can awaken, the more effective we are in working with the world. I can't deny that truth. But at the same time, Thich Nhat Hanh was brilliant, and he saw, well, it's not either or. It's not this or that. It's not a binary choice. Thich Nhat Hanh realized that, well, why can't we do both, right? Why can't we develop ourselves and yet help people around? So Thich Nhat Hanh kind of disobeyed his masters and started feeding people. The monks had all they needed. They had food, they had everything. The lay people made sure the monks had everything. And he coined this idea of engaged Buddhism. And so the idea of engaged Buddhism is that we use Buddhist principles in order to benefit the world, right? So we're practices that address the suffering of not just an individual, ourselves, at the individual level, but also society at large. Again, a balance that both can be done. Traditional Buddhism focuses on bringing long-term results, which is needed, right? Becoming awakened. And as traditional Buddhists, truly believe in the power of enlightenment, you can imagine the power of a Buddha or great bodhisattvas in the world. So there's a great truth to that. But we run into a problem when it's either or, right? So engaged Buddhism is a balanced approach which deals with long-term and immediate solutions. So this is just an absolutely brilliant thing that Thich Nhat Hanh comes up with. And I don't know if everybody knows the life story of Thich Nhat Hanh. It is truly amazing that the United Nations adopts a lot of his principles for their own. This is a man who knew well Martin Luther King. He was front and center at all these social activism. It's just an extraordinary history, one to definitely read about. So, and with SBT, of course, we share skills and methods for dealing with these things. But, when these immediate crises appear, right, or we call them hyper crises, and people ask me my advice, it's so hard for me to not tell them, I've given you all the tools that you need. We've given you the practices. It seems like to people that the practices we shared, well, yeah, those were great and those are good in some circumstances, but this is different. This is bad. There's really bad things happening. We need to do more than that. And the fact is that the practices we share can be used in all examples. I often tell that story of Richard Gere. So Richard Gere, in a sense, is a spokesman for the Dalai Lama in America. He's co-founder of Tibetan House in New York City. And after 9/11, there was a great gathering, and people were speaking. And Richard Gere was asked to give a talk. Of course, Richard Gere spoke from a Buddhist perspective, and he wanted to bring in rationality. And and he delivered a speech more on Buddhist principles, and it reflected, to be rational, to not be reactive, to not respond in haste, to be compassionate. And it was not what the audience wanted to hear. The audience was not ready to accept it and to forgive. The audience wanted blood. The audience wanted revenge. And they booed Richard Gere right off the stage. Now, I think all of us as Buddhists recognize that the need for revenge, the need to get even, is a samsaric mental state, right? It's an emotional reaction. It's very human in a lot of ways. It's understandable, but nevertheless, it's not a clear mental state. It's an afflicted mental state. And so it's that same case we deal with here, where people ask me for advice, and oftentimes they're not looking for that clarity. They really, in some ways, maybe they want to maybe accept the fact that they're angry, or they want permission to be angry. Again, a difficult topic, right? And we were talking about it, and I tried to give some kind of an answer online that according to these guidelines. And then people mentioned, well, this is different. My daughter's affected here. My friends are affected. One of my friends is going to be affected by this in our country. And when things get that immediate, when they're so personal, when they're so close, it just feels like the whole world's falling apart, doesn't it? But nevertheless, we have to recognize that we're not in the proper state of mind and try to come back to our practice. And with SBT, of course, we have the 4 steps of acceptance, and that's to become present, to accept the reality of the situation. We don't have to like it, but we have to accept it in order to be effective. Number 3 is use reason to understand and rationalize what's happening and to think of solutions. And then if we can, number 4 is to act, and act to make a difference, right? Now, I've never found a situation that the 4 steps of acceptance didn't work, no matter how big, no matter how small. But it just seems like we're in that hyper crisis mode. We want something more. We're looking for something that would act more directly. But addressing it, coming to it with an intelligent, proper state of mind is the best thing that we can do, right? Not going at it with an afflicted mind. Okay, so ways to promote this mental and emotional balance that we're talking about. So these are some of the things that I do that help me, and maybe they'll help you as well. One of the things that I do, I limit my news and media consumption. I pick a few suitable resources for my news that I've checked out, I know they're good, and I stick to them, right? I don't let social media and the news draw me in and I get into all these different news things. I have the few that I think gives me a balanced view, and I stick to those. The other one is I read the news instead of watching it. And I've noticed that when you watch television, broadcasters tend to sensationalize stories for effect and for ratings, right? The more angry they can make you, the more you watch. But I notice that when I read it, I'm not getting that emotional feedback from the broadcaster. I react to it with my own genuine feelings. And oftentimes when I'm reading the news, I'll read it on my phone in the morning. Oftentimes, just reading a headline is enough, right? When you watch the news, you're forced to watch all of it in great detail. And sometimes there was a plane crash in Hawaii, and maybe important for a lot of people. I see that headline. That's enough for me. I don't know anybody there. They have emergency people out there. They have police. They can take care of that, no problem. And so that helps me a lot. becoming more objective, just generally in our lives. And of course, this goes from meditation and mindfulness, from right view, from our practices. But and I love that expression, learning or habituating the behavior of responding to events instead of reacting to events. I think that's a really powerful statement, right? To take in the world. We often talk about being objective is like taking in the world like a camera lens, without judgment, without all that. We look at it, we take it in for what it is, we accept the reality of the situation, right? Then we decide how we want to react to it with wisdom, with maturity, with intelligence. And then again, when we're dealing with a lot of this, life is throwing at us all the obstacles and suffering that we need. What we need to do is balance it out with some positivity on our part. We need to balance it off by us keeping a proper mental state, or we say positive, wholesome mind, right? And you can do that through wholesome activities. So you can, even though the crisis is going on and you feel like you should be glued to the television and consuming this all day long, the fact is that that would bring you out of balance. So it's a good idea to balance that against, developing yourself, developing your practice, things like exercising, engaging in your favorite interests and activities, and remember to find time for fun and laughter. By ensuring that we're physically, mentally, and emotionally sound, we can be of much greater service to our communities and the world, right? So that balance is what makes us healthy, and that balance is what makes us effective. And as far as engaging in the world, of course, when you're feeling this hyper crisis mode, probably the best thing you can do is actually do something to benefit the situation, to actually act, right? And try to improve the situation. So there's many opportunities and options for getting involved. It can be local, it can be national, it can be global. You can choose topics that you're passionate about. You can get involved with groups or do it yourself. I've noticed this for a long time, that anytime I'm feeling less than optimal mental states, being productive really helps. It's kind of a band-aid, but it's a good one, right? Ultimately, our practice is what brings us, true happiness and well-being. But I find productivity really seems to help. Whatever I'm feeling, if I can do a little something to just move forward, and it doesn't have to be work, it could be, doing some dishes, just doing something, moving my life forward, just resolves a lot of those issues. I also have some other ideas here. Let me put them up here for you. And then we'll do a little Q&A. And you guys can tell me why I'm completely wrong about all of it. Hey, I had a couple ideas for you here. So as far as starting out in engaged Buddhism and using Buddhist principles to benefit the world, here's how we kind of go about it. The first thing is to start small and ease into it. You'd be surprised that just a little bit goes a long way. Oftentimes people throw themselves too much in it and deal with burnout and despair. Number two, clearly define your activism. So truly understand your aims, your role, your investment, whether that's financial or your investment in time, the type of activism you're interested in, and locations. This includes time allotments and schedules, and stick to it. One thing we learned when we lived in India, I'm talking about monks, I lived in South India for 10 years, you're just overwhelmed by the poverty around you, and everybody's asking for help. And as monks, we're saying prayers of compassion and benefiting the world every morning. And so you get caught up in this. I have a couple bucks in my pocket. Yes, it's not much, but these poor people are suffering so much. And what do you do about it? Everybody kind of has this feeling of guilt when they're living there. And what we learned was the secret was you had to define the parameters of how you were going to help ahead of time and stick to it. And so, with me being a monk, and I was a very poor monk, I decided that I would give away any change I had. Right, bills I would keep. Um, I lived on as little as $30 a month at one point when I was a monk, so I was really poor. Um, but if I had change, that's what I would give and nothing more. And then I would help people that were obviously in need of it, uh, the disabled, elderly, that kind of thing, right? And so having that um, having that all worked out ahead of time really helped me to work with it and not feel guilty or not fall into burnout. Number three, accepting the nature of the world. This is so important. All the career volunteers will tell you this is front and center to stop us from falling into burnout and despair. Uh, Go into your activism with the clear understanding that suffering is a natural aspect of the world and it will always exist. But we can lessen that suffering and support those, even those we can't immediately help. And I often say that sometimes the only thing we can really do for others in the world is support them. Now, that could be financial support or other things, but we think about even the Buddha. The Buddha just supported the people around him through teachings, right? The Buddha shared teachings. But even a Buddha could only support people. That's what us can really do. Um, Number four, accepting our own limitations. So understanding that when you get involved, that you're one person, but also remember that a continuous single drops fill up that bucket, like the old saying, right? Number five, remind yourself to stay positive, encourage your fellow activists. So again, to have that balance between dealing with life suffering and keeping some level of positivity. The suffering comes by itself just through life. We have to work on keeping this positivity alive and productivity, keeping our energy level up and our compassion for others, right? We do this through our practice. And helping others not to fall into afflictive mental and emotional states, right? Despair. And lastly, all of this is, of course, is about maintaining right view, right? We talked about we talk about right view in Buddhism, right view being the proper perspective of life, right? And for Buddhists, it means understanding the Buddhist model of the nature of reality. But all of these things are according to right view of having a clear and accurate view of the world. There's no greater tool in affecting real positive change, right? So I think on that note, I'll turn the floor open to questions. I don't know if I covered it all. It was a tough topic to write about. Every day I seem to change it up. What do you think? Is it beneficial to anybody? Pasang, please.
Very, very beneficial, I think. This is a complicated topic, as you say, but you did it very well, I think.
Very kind of you. Thank you so much. Yes, now on, please.
I think for me, when I read about some of the things in the news and when I think about them, the part that really weighs heaviest on me is the sense of helplessness. The I mean, I have all the feelings of fear for my own well-being. I have fear and dread for what's happening to people in war zones and all the other places. But then I think about what can I possibly do, and I just feel helpless at times. I really liked the 6 points that you mentioned in how to be engaged. I think understanding our limitations really stood out for me. Um, I often feel like I wish I could do more, and then I have to realize what I'm capable of doing. And so anyways, I just wanted to kind of highlight the feeling of helplessness as a really important feeling to grapple with. So thanks, Tarpa. I thought it was really good what you presented so far.
Thank you. And I agree. In fact, I used the word hopeless at one point where I talk about falling into being angry, but I think you're right. The proper word would have been helpless. It's a helplessness. You're exactly right. That's what a lot of people are feeling. Dana, please.
You have a lot of good suggestions. I think you did an excellent job. The I've heard other lamas at the end of the retreats suggesting going on a news diet, and I have a hard time, and that's brought my awareness to my consumption of news, and that what I do try to read the news more now, because I recognize, just as you were saying, that there's such, the news is more like entertainment now, and more than what's really important to our lives. And so in just reading the headline, or even if I am watching it on television, I'll sort of edit what as I'm looking at it, and I'm saying, I already know this, because they just rerun the same thing over and over and over again. And it seems like, there's an airplane crash every day. And, and of course, there's people that are suffering every day, so they can find that stuff. And I understand that they've done some research that that's what we tend to do is look for the things that are dangerous. And so that's what grabs our attention. Oh, that's dangerous. Look at that fire. Look at those people losing their homes or whatever. Or so yeah, I think that you came up with a lot of very good practical things, and I have to take responsibility for what I'm ingesting. And am I bringing loving things, loving ideas into my day, or am I just bringing in
That's
fear?
right. I agree. And I'm with you. This idea of ignoring the media, and that's just irresponsible. The idea is always balance, right? Even if you're watching YouTube, many people might not know that AI on YouTube will translate all of the transliterate all the words in the script for you, so you can read it instead of watch it. Transcribe. What was the word I used? My apologies. But I'm with you, Dana. The idea is, no, we definitely need to be informed. As a monk, I battled that for a long time. A lot of monks think that they should just ignore everything going around them. I thought, no, that's not. We have to be intelligent, wise people. We have to know what's happening if we want to benefit the world. But there is a balance there, right? We often talk about one of the things that people don't understand, that the things in the world are never the problem. It's our relationship to the things. Well, I shouldn't use the word never the problem. The things in the world are rarely the problem. It's often our relationship to those things that's the problem, right? David, please.
Yeah, yeah, great talk, Tarpa. Great. One thing, the difficulty that I've had is in knowing what to trust in the news. As you kind of said, the news should really be retitled the bad news. So apart from all the hype that is built into the news that we read, and that happens in the papers as well, it's apart from that, there's still a lot of difficulty, because certain things become mainstream kind of beliefs and they just feed into that. I've studied the war in Ukraine closely, and the reporting has just been shameful.
That's
But
right.
people don't know that, And the main point I wanted to know is the best source of news I found is Wikipedia. Now, you don't get up to date, so if you want up to date what's happening today, you can't get it. But the couple of times I've been on the inside of a story that was newsworthy, they were down the line about it. They were straight and clear. So that's my experience. That I would, if you're looking for.
Well, again, let's open that up. Instead of having one thing, let's talk about, we want a spectrum of things. So what we want to do is we want to be able to contrast and compare, right? This is where wisdom is created. The more we can contrast and compare, the more reliable our wisdom and insights. So the idea is to research and find those sources of news that you feel are more reliable. And also, it's up to you, but finding a balance of news, that's a whole nother talk in itself. But it's up to you to find that balance. That way you can contrast and compare, right? That's really the only tool we have for that. But I agree with you. Mr. Damon? We can't hear you, Damon. I wonder why. You're not muted. Is your microphone turned on?
No,
I can hear you now.
thank you. Sorry. No, I was saying I made myself a bulleted list in an email to send to myself because they're such good points, but they're easy to forget if I'm not constantly reminded of them. So I think it helps me to keep it in the forefront of my mind. But regarding balance, I think it's important to also point out that there's news and then there's the opinion op-ed people.
Yeah.
And a lot of people that I know, they will form entire worldviews, not based on the news segments, but based on the opinion segments, which are often rooted in fear, a fear-based sort of information, right? And so a lot of people react to that negatively. And I feel like balance is such a crucial element to parsing out the two and not falling prey to like a propaganda tactic, because that could take our emotions and take us on a really negative ride sometimes.
Yeah, and it manipulates us, right? And you're right, it's a whole new world with these opinion journalists where they claim, oh, I'm not telling the news, this is an opinion piece. And yeah, we got to be really careful of that. I agree. Frenya was talking about, well, sometimes, I don't have the resources to help people financially. In Buddhism, generosity, financial generosity is considered a lower form of generosity, being your time, your kindness. You mentioned just being able to smile and make people feel better. Giving the Dharma is considered the greatest of all generosities. So yeah, it doesn't have to be financial. We give in any way we can. Would anybody else? Yeah, no one, please.
Yeah, one other thing that I think that I've been personally working on is how to have how should I say it, a carrying conversation with someone who has views that are quite different than mine. And I know so often, we have the issues of social media with people popping up with aggressive attitudes and ideas and a lot of personal attacks. And so how to navigate all that is a big challenge in our world nowadays, because so much of what we do is on social media. And one example I have is I have a neighbor that he posts things every once in a while that really grate me against what I believe in. And when that happens, I try to pull back and I look at it and I think about, this is a guy that I care about. I don't know him real well, but he's a neighbor and I care about him. And I think he's afflicted, just like I am and everybody else, with some distorted perspective. And so I try to think about, how can I engage with him in a way that supports our mutual benefit and not so much have to prove a point. And I think that when we get in these conversations and we feel like we have to prove a point, it really gets in the way of us being caring and human with each other.
And we call this wisdom. That's wisdom. That's exactly right. Brilliantly said. And then we get that from practice. So some of the takeaways I want to make sure everybody keeps with them is one of them is, understanding is one of the most powerful tools we have. Understanding and acceptance, right? And all the other points I forgot about. What was the one I wanted to share? Having the right frame of mind is by far the right view, proper perspective is by far the greatest benefit we have in everything in life, whether it's making simple daily choices or making big decisions in times of crisis. When we have clarity, when we have intelligence, when we've developed our higher brain functions, which is what Buddhist practice does, we can do better. We can tackle these things. And with Buddhist practice, we're preemptive. We develop our minds before crisis hits so we can deal with them. But again, I like to highlight the 4 steps of acceptance just seems to work for all kinds of occasions. People that don't practice it, it just remains, kind of just a conceptual kind of practice, right? Theoretical. It's not until you actually start practicing it and applying it to your problems that you see, oh wow, this is really a powerful practice. So I encourage everybody to do so. And the other one is that we're sangha together. So when things like this happen, we can rely on each other. Remember impermanence. Life is ebb and flow. We get things go our way, problems arise. We just work our way through them, and we work to benefit the people around us. I'll post some of the notes that some of the bullet lists that I shared with everybody on social media. But ultimately in Buddhism, it's all about right view, right? Let alone will you have the right mind to process the crises that arise, and you won't fall into helplessness and despair, but you'll have the proper mind to deal with what comes along and solutions. So anyways, I hope that was helpful to everybody. Yeah, a really tough topic. Hey, so next Sunday, we are getting back into our Sunday Dharma teachings. We had a request to do a little mind training. Mind training is a really awesome practice, a Mahayana practice that's one of the key practices of the Bodhisattva. Anyone can practice mind training, and each day of the week, we're going to contemplate a specific topic. And through 6 days, we get a deeper and deeper understanding of ourselves and others. This practice is aimed at gaining bodhicitta, which they call the mind of awakening. One could call it the loving mind. And so bodhicitta in a lot of ways is an awakened love for all beings. So it's a powerful practice. Everybody loves it. We're going to start it next Sunday. So we'll give a teaching on Sunday, and then Monday through Saturday, we'll practice the different levels of contemplations. I'll make a little teaching each morning that I'll put on videos for everybody. And it's an extraordinary practice. Other than that, we're in the middle of our winter fundraiser. If anybody if you're enjoying the work we're doing, everything that we do is free. Occasionally we do need to get some donations in to keep things moving forward. Would appreciate any help that you could give. In a few weeks, we're going to be starting a series of meditation programs throughout the spring. You can read about those on the website. Register for them. They're going to be wonderful. I can't wait to share them. It's a brand new type of meditation programs version of meditation programs that's going to be really exciting. Okay, with that said, why don't we end today's teaching with our altruistic affirmation? May all be healthy, may all be prosperous, may all be well, may all be present, free of past regret and future worry. May all abide in constant appreciation, which is a source of great joy and contentment. May all realize their true nature and the true nature of reality, which is awakening. Thanks for joining me, friends. Have yourselves a wonderful week. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Tarpa.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Tarpa.
Tarpa.